Okay, can you all hear me first of all? Let's see, we get some responses. Fantastic, good. Great, okay, lots of yeses then. Can you see me as well? Lucky you. Okay, this is very strange for me because I'm not used to doing a seminar without audience sitting in front of me, so it's great. Keep those messages coming so I realize you're still there. Otherwise I might just kind of go to sleep or something. Okay, so you can see the title of the session we've got today, Beginners in English, Experts in Life. Now, a couple of moments ago, Caroline was explaining to you how you can vote using the A, B, C buttons, yeah, which is in the participants window. And in fact, we're going to start off just exactly at that spot on the screen, and I'm going to ask you a question. Okay, I'm going to ask you at what level students can do all four of the following things. Okay, so which level? Elementary, that's A, B, intermediate, C, advanced. Can students do all four of the things listed below? Would you like to vote now using the A, B, C button in the participants window? If you click on A, you'll see your options, and you can start putting your answers in. Okay, lots of people voting now. Fantastic. Okay, we've got a clear winner, which is intermediate. Votes still coming in. Okay, fantastic. Lots of people writing B and C here. Looks like intermediate is by far and away the winner at the moment. Okay, so it looks like about, I'm trying to read the numbers here. Is that 67 or 670, Matt? What does that say? 68, yeah, okay. So at the moment, the votes are still coming in, but we've got about 69 people, something like that, who say intermediate. About 42 people have voted for advanced, and about 22, 23 voting for elementary. The votes are still coming in, but more or less in those kind of proportions. So about 50% of people are saying that intermediate is the level at which students can do these things, and the rest of the voters are kind of divided between elementary and advanced. Okay, we're going to come back to that question later on in the session. You can stop voting now. I think I'm just going to clear that, so no more voting here. Okay, great. And we're going to move on, and we're going to start by talking about hamburgers. Now, possibly you think I've gone a bit mad, and you might well be right, but we're going to start talking about hamburgers to illustrate a point. What we're going to do is think about McDonald's, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, and we're going to do a SWOT analysis. A SWOT analysis, if you're not familiar with the term, is a type of study that businesses do so that they can work out their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, this is very important because a business needs to know their strengths so that they can make the public very aware of them. They need to know their weaknesses so that they can either hide them or deal with them or make them seem less important. They need to know the opportunities that their business has so that they can exploit them and make their business better. And also they need to know their threats so that they can protect themselves. So if we're thinking about McDonald's, we're going to carry on with hamburgers for a little bit, but I haven't gone completely mad here. If we think about McDonald's strengths, well, it's a very cheap product. The labor force has a low skills level, so it's quite a cheap labor force as well. The golden arches, well, everybody recognizes those. It has universal recognition. And it's also a product which can be expanded in many different areas with a reduced central risk. You can have lots and lots of franchises. If we think about the weaknesses, well, there's one very obvious one, unfortunately, the food. It's not very good. Another weakness, of course, is that because we've got this low cost and low price, the actual profit margin on each unit that you sell is also very low. So there's not a lot of money to be made for each hamburger you sell. In terms of opportunities, well, obviously, McDonald's, this brand that we all recognize, has a lot of opportunities for expansion. There's a whole world out there that McDonald's can go and conquer. Okay, so there's lots of opportunities for it to get out there and develop the business all around the world. But then, of course, there are threats. And the threats to McDonald's come from things like other companies who can very easily copy what the product is. It's very easy to come up with Burger King and Wendy, who basically did the same thing. Then you can have terrible problems like mad cows and other health risks, which might come along to destroy your business that you've just set up. And then, of course, there are people who might come along and try and discredit you or expose what you're doing. People like Morgan Spurlock, who we can see in the photo here. So this is thinking about hamburgers: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So we've talked about burgers, McDonald's, I'm loving it, but we're all teachers, and what we're really interested in is teaching. So let's move from the big golden M to the big golden B, beginners. I'm teaching them. What I would like you to do is to think about some of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats involved in teaching beginners. When I say beginners, I'm meaning beginners and elementary students. So what I'd like you to do in the chat box is just write in any things you can think about which make beginners a fantastic level to teach, strength, or makes it a very difficult level to teach. And what I'd like you to do is to write your ideas with S if it's a strength, W if you see it as a weakness, O if it's an opportunity at the start of your thing. So you might write S, enthusiasm. Yeah, brilliant. Someone's just done that. Anna, thank you very much. S, eagerness. Okay, so write the initial letter. We've got lots of ideas coming in here. Fantastic. Enthusiasm. Okay, lots of strengths coming in now. What about some of the weaknesses? Okay, we've got lots of strengths: interested, motivation, openness. We can see lots of enthusiastic, low-level teachers here. But what about some of the W's, some of the weaknesses? Any ideas there? Okay, yeah, attention, difficult to communicate. Okay, I can feel people typing out there. Any opportunities you can think of when it comes to teaching low-level students? Okay, let's see if we've got some more things coming in now. Tabula rasa. Okay, lots of ideas. And any threats you can see? Good, I can learn from them, absolutely. Nice to see that one. Okay, lots of ideas coming through here. Brilliant. Okay, thanks for your participation there. I'm just going to talk through what I see as being the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of beginners. And we've got lots of the ideas that you've just mentioned there on the chat are going to come up here. So let's just have a look at this. Strengths, first of all. I think one of the most important strengths is, some of you mentioned tabula rasa. It's this idea that they know nothing. Low-level students are very malleable. We can give them all the knowledge that they haven't got up until this point. Being a beginner or a low-level student can be a very motivating experience. They can be very aware of their progress. And their progress happens. They go from not being able to do anything in the language to being able to do things. So there's a real sense of motivation that comes from this, and also this tends to lead to a great sense of loyalty to the first teacher, that teacher who helps them get on the way with the language. So here are some of the strengths. Okay, but of course there are also weaknesses. One of the most important weaknesses, I think, is this one. English is a very perplexing language. Studying a foreign language, it's very strange, it's very difficult, there are lots of things we don't understand very well. It can also seem like an uphill struggle. It seems to take a long time to get anywhere. It's all new, it's all difficult, I've got nothing to build on. And another very important weakness that affects adult learners is that many of them, if they are beginners and low-level students, will not have learnt languages recently, and their expectations of the classroom, of the teacher's role, of the methodology are perhaps going to be at odds with what is current in classrooms now. So if we have communicative classrooms, the students aren't going to be used to taking those kind of risks or taking a more participative role in the classroom. They have expectations of what the teacher's like, which may be very different from what teachers are like today. There's also opportunities, as many of you wrote down, and this is great. One of the things that's a great opportunity for us as teachers of low-level students is that we have the chance to shape our students' habits. We can determine whether they're going to have good learning habits from the start or not. So for example, if you want your students to only speak in English in class, well, that's something you can set up. If you want your students to keep their vocabulary notes in a certain way because you think that's going to help them study, you can do that, and you're not fighting against their established practice. Yeah, so here's an example. If we want to get our students speaking to each other and using English right the way through the class, well, we can facilitate this by teaching them the necessary classroom language that they may need in order to do this. But then, of course, there are threats. One of the most important, I think, is stress. It's very, very stressful being a low-level student. There are so many different things you have to do, and you can be very motivated when you start out, but it's quite easy to lose that motivation if you don't feel you're successful quite quickly. There can be real feelings of frustration. Can you hear me? Somebody's saying speak up. I don't know how the rest of you. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, is that better now? Okay, I'm getting some yeses in. Good. Okay, I hope you can all hear. If you have any problems, please type them in for Caroline, yeah? So it can be very frustrating being a low-level student. There's so many things which we don't know. And of course, this can lead to demotivation. And although the initial feeling may be, oh, I've learned a lot in a short space of time, it can seem like there's a very, very long way to go until we're going to get any better at this language. So let's move on a little bit. When I started writing Global Beginners and Elementary, I decided I needed to do some things to really get in tune with teaching low-level students. It was something I'd done a lot already, but two things I think were fundamental in helping me really be in tune with what it meant to be a beginner or elementary student. The first thing was that I became a student myself. I started learning Chinese, and I was a beginner in Chinese. I did an intensive course studying every day, and it was a very, very scary experience. There were so many things I had to remember, and it was like being a juggler. You know when you're trying to throw all the plates in the air, and you're always going to lose one and drop it. That was what it felt like to be a beginner in Chinese. There were so many different things I had to get together in order to say anything. So going back and being a beginner and feeling that fear, that frustration, was very, very important. And if you teach low-level students, it's something I would really, really recommend you to do. Even if you're not a native speaker of English, you've all got a great level of English. And it can be a real eye-opener to go back to a new language and start all over again and see what it's like. The other thing that was very, very helpful to me was that I taught a very special beginners group. Now, I work in International House in Madrid, and we'd had a few problems in our beginners classes that we had certain students in them who seemed to struggle. They were always falling behind, they were getting demotivated, and we tried trying to identify what these students had in common. And there was one very clear thing we soon realized. These were all older students. in Spain, where I work, the majority of people under the age of about 45 have studied English at school. But older learners, people 45 and upwards, would probably have done French. And this meant that these students had no previous language learning experience of English. Let's just have a look at the group, though, that I taught, because it was the group itself that was very helpful for me. Here's a photograph of them, and we're going to look a little bit in more detail at some of the students. So this is my seniors class. This is from about 3 years ago. I've had other senior groups since then. Let's just have a look. On the right here, we've got Jesus. Jesus was 64 when I started teaching him, and he was a theologian. He had studied ancient Greek and Hebrew. On the other side, we have Emilio, and he was 65. And he was a retired secondary school teacher, a history teacher, and unusually in Spain, he was very political, and he was a Republican, which is not so common in Spain. He was very interested in politics. Moving on, this is Teresa, and when I taught her, she was 67, and she was a retired civil servant, but she was also studying a university course. Then we have two other ladies here. On the right, we have Carmen. Carmen was 68, and her brother was living in the United States, and she often went to visit him. And on the left, we've got Maria Luisa, and she was the oldest student. She was 70. Okay, fantastic. This woman, she did yoga. She traveled all over Asia. She recently, when I taught her, she had recently visited Indonesia and Burma. Fascinating woman, 70, and she decided to start learning English. And then there's one more student. Let's just go back a minute here. The guy in the kind of green shirt in the middle, he was Antonio. He was the youngest in the class. He was 57, and he was a university maths professor. Now, I've told you a bit about these students because I think it's very, very important to see the kind of people that we had in this beginner's class and that we have in many of our beginner's classes. Now, at the start of the year, these students had an incredibly low level of English. Some of them didn't know beyond the number 3. 1, 2, 3, nothing. That was it. They had no English. This was unusual in Spain. You get quite used to having most people having some knowledge, but these people didn't have any, and there are students like this all over the world. They had no recent experience of learning any languages. Previously, they'd learned French. The methodology had been very traditional. The teacher had had a very different role from the type of role that I had. They had no experience of a communicative approach in which they were required to speak and perhaps make fools of themselves. So everything was very strange and new for them. They were definitely beginners in English. And yet, as I've told you, in this group we had a university math professor, we had a retired teacher, we had a theologian who spoke ancient Greek and Hebrew, we had a woman who was studying a university course, we had a woman who traveled all over the place. And this, I think, takes us back to the title of this session. So many of our low-level students are beginners in English, but experts in life. And I think it's very important to bear in mind these two sides of the equation, and that's really what we're going to be looking at here. How our students are beginners in English, but experts in life, and what we can do to bring that into our classroom. So, the first thing we're going to look at, we're going to start with the beginners in English side. So we're thinking here very much about the type of linguistic support that students need. And I've called this section Scaffolding for Success. I think it's very important for low-level students to feel motivated and be successful at the tasks they do. Get them doing things in English and doing it successfully. And in order to do this, I think one of the most important things is to start at the end. If we want students to do a task, for example, this is a typical beginner or elementary level task, then I think what we as teachers have to do is have this as our starting point when we plan, and really in a way plan backwards from this. If you want your students to do this successfully, look at all the other things they need in order to do so. For example, it's probably going to be helpful when they're describing their house or flat to their partner that they have a plan in front of them. They can write the names of the rooms, they have something to point at, and they've got a kind of reference that they can use in order to support them while they're speaking. It may well be useful to give our students some useful phrases, the typical things that we would say if we were doing this ourselves. So keep in mind the final task there is in red. Before the students draw their own plan, it's probably going to be helpful for them to listen to someone else describing their flat. This will serve as a model for them and an idea of how they can organize their own description. Perhaps when they're listening, they can take a note of the vocabulary that they hear in the conversation, and this will then help them when they come to draw their own plan. Perhaps before they listen, we can check they know the vocabulary for rooms and furniture by getting them to match words and pictures. And probably in the lesson before this, they're also going to need to have had some language input. We probably wouldn't manage to do that all in the same class. So expressions like there is, there are. So as you can see, the actual outcome, the task, is right down at the bottom of my lesson. And all these other stages that I've included in it are there in order to make the students do that task successfully, because this is going to help them become motivated. Now we're just going to go back to my classroom. You saw my students a few minutes ago. This is the board that they were looking at. And this is precisely what I've just been talking about. They were going to do a presentation about a trip. And so we built it all up with some photographs of my trip, and some vocabulary had come out of that. And then we did a little bit of work on past tense questions. Now we hadn't actually done the past tense here, we'd just done the present tense questions. And I just kind of slipped in did as a past auxiliary verb. And they had my example as a model, and then they had some preparation time, and they went and did their own presentation. So their work was very carefully supported so that when they came to do the speaking, they were able to be successful. And this leads us on to the next point I wanted to make, the next section, which is manageable, productive outcomes. We need to get students, even low-level students, doing things with language, not just studying it, but doing things with it, having something to show for their efforts, even at a basic linguistic level. Now, I'm going to show you a story, and I'm going to show it line by line. And when you think you know what the story is, it's a famous story, I want you to write the name in the chat box. Okay, here's the first line. Okay, whenever you think you know the story, you can start writing. No answers yet. Nobody's quite there. You're waiting a bit longer. Some people are starting to write. Okay, we've got a lot of romantic stories coming. Okay, the next line's I think really going to give it away to you all. Okay, a lot of you got there already? Yes. Okay, it's the Titanic. Yeah, everyone's writing it now. Okay, now what about the language level of this particular text? Is it difficult language? We've got the present simple, we've got short sentences, we've got the verb to be. Okay, we can see that the language that's used here to tell this story is in fact very, very simple, and yet the story is clear. Yeah? We're going to do the same again with two other stories, okay? This time you're going to see the whole story at once, and I want to see, there's two film stories here. See if you can write in the name of the two films. Here's the first one. Okay, that's all you're going to get. You've got to write down what do you think the story is. Okay, some are coming through. Yep, you're right. It's Jaws. Very good. And here's the other one. Let's see if you can get this one as quickly. Okay, write in when you think you know the title of this film. Yes, good. Quite a lot of people coming in there. Yes, it's alien. Okay, now we can see that these two stories, the language level is very simple. It's very accessible for low-level students. But we can identify the film. And what these texts are pitches. Here's a definition. So a pitch is a short description to sell an idea. Film producers look at thousands of pitches. The idea is that this goes back to the 1970s or so in Hollywood, perhaps the 1960s as well. And they used to say that if a story was sufficiently good, that was going to make a good film, a big blockbuster film that everyone was going to go and see, you could convey the story in just 50 words. If you needed more language than that, probably the story was too complex. But a good story is really punchy in just 50 words. So the idea is that we can get our students to then go and write their own texts. They're simple texts, but they're texts that are good enough to communicate the idea, and they can swap texts with other students. They can write in pairs. You can get them to stick the text up around the room, and then everyone can go and write down. So you label the text A, B, C around the room, and everybody goes to write down the titles of the films they've got there. Okay, it's a really nice motivating idea that doesn't require an awful lot of language. So it's a manageable, productive outcome. Okay, let's move on. Another thing to help our beginners in English is to make sure that everybody is successful. This is really, really important. Low-level students tend to be quite mixed, quite often in terms of some will have a bit more English than others, some may be better language learners than others. They can be quite mixed. So I think it's very useful if we can try to incorporate some mixed ability tasks. We're going to look at that now. First of all, let's look at a piece of material. Just quickly write in, what language do you think we're practicing here? This comes from the first unit of an elementary book. What's the language point here that students are practicing? Yes, great, they're coming in now. Numbers and the alphabet. And this is a really nice way to do numbers and the alphabet. Rather than just doing numbers at random, we've made it real. We've contextualized it into international number plates. And they're kind of interesting because they all look different. Exactly, somebody's just written nationalities. Indeed, one of the tasks that the students have to do is to match the number plates to a list of different countries. So it's also working on countries and nationalities as well. But moving on through the sequence of activities that the students would do, the next thing that they do is a little dialogue. In fact, they listen to two dialogues, each of which contains a car license plate. And they have to identify which one from the list is referred to. But as you can see in the task here, what the students are practicing is ... What are they practicing here? Okay, it could be contracted forms, yeah, but more specifically the verb to be, exactly. There's some people coming in with it there. They're practicing the verb to be because we said, you know, this is unit 1 of an elementary book. So the students do the discrimination activity. They decide which is the correct form. So then I've just summarized everything here. On the left we can see the number plates. On the right we've now got the completed dialogue with the verb to be. But the interesting part is the bit in blue down at the bottom there. Okay, because here we have 3 different tasks. In the first one, the students work in pairs, and one person says a number plate, and the other one has to point to the plate. It's very simple. In the second one, the students have to read the conversation, and then they cover their book or turn away and try to remember it, try to reconstruct the conversation. In the third one, the students have to change some of the essential details. So they could change the name, they could change the type of car, the number plate, and so on. So we can see we've got 3 tasks here, and the challenge increases. Ara, thank you very much. You just said that exact same thing. So the challenge is increasing through the tasks. Now you can use these in different ways. You might say, okay, I want you, Natalie and Pablo, I want you to do task 1, and Dora and Ignacio, I want you to do task 2, or B here it is, sorry, and Paco and Amelia, I want you to do task C. So you can actually assign different tasks to different students. Another option is to get the students themselves to choose. Say, okay, these tasks get more difficult, choose which one you want to do. Another option is to do one of the tasks today and then maybe come back and do another task again in a subsequent lesson. But in any case, we've got this variety of tasks which we can use to cater to those mixed ability students in our groups. Okay, and that's very important. Now, I mentioned they're coming back to doing the task later on, possibly in a subsequent class. That's what we're going to move on to now, the idea of practice. This is so important for low-level students. Practice, practice, practice. I've never heard a student saying we practice too much, but I've seen lots of students who've suffered through not practicing enough. Beginners need to have loads of practice in order to recycle things. My older students forgot everything, so we'd study one thing on Monday, by Wednesday they'd forgotten it. We had to start all over again. 150 ways to practice the verb to be. That was interesting, I can tell you. But also it's very important to boost their confidence. So I do a lot of things revisiting texts. Here's an example. Here's a text you've seen before. Tell me the missing words in red. Okay, you've got two words which are missing in red. Can you just write in what those words should be? Should be a story that's familiar to you. Ah, good. Ara, you're there. Okay, go, 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 go. We're getting to the first one. What about the second word in red? What's the other missing word? We've got a few the, but I don't think the is right. Ah, her, yes. Okay, so the original text was, a rich girl meets a poor boy, and in the third line, she then decides to leave her rich boyfriend. Okay, now with you, I've just asked you to fill a couple of those gaps, but with the students, I would ask them to fill all the gaps. Now, in your case, you did this activity probably only 5 minutes ago, so the text is very, very familiar to you. With my students, I would come back to this text maybe a week or 2 weeks later. At that point then, it's not a memory activity. It's an activity which encourages the students to draw on all their linguistic resources. Now, to do this, the students need to know, for example, articles, because the first line starts, a rich girl, okay? But later on, we get the girl, or a boy, the boy. We can see the transition from indefinite to definite article. That's an important thing for students to learn. Yeah, we can get an idea of syntax, that we have the subject before the verb. We can get, we've got some prepositions here, we've got some simple linkers. So this is bringing together lots of different areas of language that students at this level have studied. But importantly, when they see this text, they don't think, ah, I don't understand anything, I'm a beginner, this is too difficult. No, they think, ah, Titanic, I know this, I've done this before. The students instantly feel confident, so we can put aside that fear and that anxiety in order to free them up to focus on language. And I think that's really important. Yeah, and if we look ahead, another week or two later, we give them this version. It's the same text again, but this time they've got to draw on even more of their linguistic resources in order to put the text together. Okay? It's a simple text. Remember, it was only 50 words, but you can get so much activity out of it. It's fantastic. And you get away from the fear that a new text gives. So I do this a lot with low-level students. I go back to text and I go back to text. They never say it's boring. Oh, okay, we've seen the Titanic before. No, they smile. They say, ah, Titanic, I'm okay here. So that's really nice. Go back to text, take your coursebook listenings, your readings, your control practice exercises, and do other things with them. It's really motivating for students. Okay, so up until now we've looked at one side of the equation, the beginners in English. What we're going to do now is move on to experts in life. Remember, our students are intelligent, articulate adults. So we support them with language, but we also get them thinking. Now we're going to do a little poll here. So again, we're going to go back to the participant box, and just under my name you'll see the A, B, C. We're going to do some voting now. So I'm going to show you some photographs of some people, and I would like you to indicate how interested you are. A, very interested, B, indifferent, and C, not at all interested. Can you vote now? Okay, people are voting. While you vote, I'm going to have a little drink of water. That's better. Okay, voting's going on. Just put the microphone back. Okay, the votes are coming in. Now, this is very interesting here because what I'm seeing, we've got a few people. So we've got about just over 100 people have voted now. About 13 people have said they are not at all interested. They're quite clear they're not at all interested in these people. 46 people have said they're very interested. But 53 people have said they are indifferent. Now, something I think that's a bit of a problem is that in a lot of course books, our students are forced to have a diet of celebrities. We get these kind of people, we get articles that look as though they've come from kind of women's magazines, and I think not all of our students are interested in that stuff. Some people are, and that's fine, but I think there's a bit of a danger that we could alienate our students. Yeah, Lady Gaga is eating her nails, you're right, horrible. I think this kind of gives a message that in order to study English, you have to be into this kind of celebrity culture. Well, that's just not true. Why do the two things go together? Now, you can imagine my senior students, they look at these three people, they don't recognize any of them. They haven't a clue, and if they do know, they're not particularly interested in Lady Gaga or Cristiano Ronaldo. So we have a lot of made-up people in course books, and I don't quite understand that, because there's lots of interesting people out there without having all these celebrities on the one hand or invented people on the other. Here are some real people. Now look at that photo, isn't that fantastic? Okay, it's a real family here, and these are real people. These are not celebrities, I don't know their names. Like your family, says Ashley. Okay, good. And here's another family. Now look at that, isn't that a great contrast? These are real people. Now, what language point do you think we're looking at here? Just type in if you can see what language. We've got healthy food, health, food. Okay, yeah, exactly. So there's a clear theme going on. But these are real people, and more importantly, there's an interview that comes up, which is again with another real person. These photographs come from a book, and it's a very, very interesting book. Here's some information about it. Just have a quick read here. Gives you an idea. So the photographs come from a book which is all about photographs of different families around the world and what they eat in a typical week. It's a fascinating book. The photographs are brilliant, but also the contrast in the type of food that people eat in different parts of the world is just amazing. But this is real, intelligent interest about real people. We don't need celebrities in order to learn English. Okay, we can do interesting things that appeal to adults. Okay, but of course there has to be a language point here. There's some grammar going on as well. What do you think the grammar is that we're dealing with here? Any ideas about the grammar? Just type in if you think you know. Countable and uncountable nouns, some people are saying, yeah, could be present simple. Thinking about the photographs in particular, in fact, what the language is, here we have it, quantifiers. Okay, so we've got sentences like the Guatemalan family eats a lot of fruit. They don't eat much processed food. So here we've got grammar practice, which of course our low-level students need, but in an interesting context. Okay, and again, if you look on the right-hand side in the writing, we've got mixed ability tasks. So different students can be assigned different tasks depending on their ability. So real people. Another thing I think we can do with our intelligent adult students is real English. Just because they're beginners doesn't mean they can't understand real English. I'm going to show you two quotations now, and you'll see some gaps in the quotations. Now, all the gaps can be filled with the same word, just one word. Okay, so what I want you to do is to read them and type in that one missing word which will fit all the gaps. Here you go. Fantastic. Lots of you have got it. Excellent stuff. Yeah, it's work. In fact, sorry, I didn't highlight the first one. There's 3 uses of the word work there. So we've got these 2 sentences. The first one, a kind of interesting idea. One machine can do the work of 50 ordinary men. That's true. Think of a factory. But no machine can do the work of 1 extraordinary man. That's an interesting idea. But the language isn't difficult. My elementary students can understand that. They're intelligent adults. They like that kind of thing. They think, I understand that. That's witty. And that's witty in English, and I understand it. What about the second one? I like work. This is my sentence, yeah? I didn't say this, but I sympathize with it. I can sit and look at it for hours. The idea that we procrastinate, we don't actually do the job, we just look at it and think about it and put it off. But the interesting thing here is that these are quotations. And these are quotations from real people. But not real people of today, not real English teachers or course book writers, real people. Elbert Hubbard was an American writer and philosopher. Jerome K. Jerome was a British humorist, and they were both writing at the end of the 19th century. This is not written for ELT students, but this is real language that our students can engage with and find interesting and stimulating and adult. Okay, so having things that are intelligent and accessible for students is very, very important. Another typical area that we might be doing with vocabulary at low levels is family vocabulary. And again, typically you might well see, you know, the celebrity family. Yeah, in some books, it might be the family of, probably it'll be Obama's family soon. That'll be the latest thing. Okay, but here's another way that we could do this. I'm going to show you some diagrams on the right, and on the left, you've got a summary of perhaps a play you may know. If we look at this summary, we can see that it reflects the diagram in number 1. So in Denmark, Prince Hamlet's father is dead. So we've got this male symbol with a crossed out, it's a dead sign, and his mother Gertrude is now married, so we've got the female symbol, and we've got below in the second generation we've got Hamlet himself, and then on the right hand side we've got Hamlet's uncle. So we can see that we've got here a pictorial representation of the characters in Hamlet. I'm going to show you 2 more Shakespeare plays, and what I want you to do is to choose from the other diagrams on the right which number represents each play. Here they are, King Lear and Romeo and Juliet. Okay, so if you want to type in now. Okay, good. Lots of you have got that King Lear is number 4. Yeah, we've got the male symbol and then the 3 daughters. What about Romeo and Juliet? Which symbol is that? Which diagram is that? Romeo and Juliet. We've got these 2 families. Romeo is the son of Lord and Lady Montagu. So we've got husband and wife and a son. And on the other side, we've got a husband and wife and a daughter. Okay, so Romeo and Juliet, yeah, it's number 3, exactly. So we can see that our students can deal with these texts, Shakespeare, but they can deal with it because we give them a non-linguistic response. Now you might still say, well, there's quite a lot of difficult vocabulary here for low-level students. And when I did this with my students, I gave them a bit of help. So before they read the text, they did this. This is in Spanish because my students are in Madrid. They did a little matching exercise with the more difficult vocabulary. Okay, and then when they knew the vocabulary, we went back and they did this. Okay, but I think the important thing here is that our students can deal with sophisticated adult texts provided we give them the right support and give them non-linguistic response tasks. Another way that we can make texts easier for low-level students is by breaking them up. Here's an example where we've got the text into 3 or 4 different boxes on the page. Now this is much easier for students. They feel far less frightened when they see this than they would if they saw one long stream of text. So this is the type of thing that we can do, putting text into small chunks. It's still a real text, but we're making it a little bit less frightening for low-level students. So just to summarize what we've been talking about up until now. Our students form two sides of an equation. Okay? On the one hand, they are beginners in English. We need to scaffold their learning. We need to support them so that they can be successful. We need to give them tasks with which they can produce English and feel satisfied. We need to ensure that all our students in the class, weak and stronger, are successful, because that's what makes them motivated. And we need to provide practice, practice, practice. Keep going back and doing things again and giving them more practice. But at the same time, on the other hand, our students are experts in life. They're intelligent, they're adults, they're university professors, they're doctors. They have thinking brains, and they don't want to be treated in an infantile way. So let's give them real people, not invented people, and not celebrities all the time. Let's give them real English. Let's take quotations and real pieces of English that they can engage with. And let's think of devices we can use to help them deal with texts, perhaps through non-linguistic tasks or through breaking text into sections to make it accessible for them. So going back to what we talked about right at the start and the initial poll that we did about what level students need to be to do different things, hopefully by now you've realized, I firmly believe that with the right support, beginners can do all of the following in English. They can give presentations, they can read intelligent texts, they can understand quotations, and they can even engage with the plays of Shakespeare, because they are beginners in English but experts in life. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. And I think, Caroline, we're probably now going to hand over to you and any questions that people have if they want to ask. Thank you very much. Lovely comments coming in. And thank you for being there. It's been very exciting doing my first webinar and with so many people from all over the place. Brilliant. Thanks. Any questions? Do I need to switch off the talk or the video now? Okay, I'm going to switch off the talk and the video now, but if you want to put in questions, but then do I answer the questions speaking? Okay, we'll just give it a couple of minutes to see if anyone's got any questions to write in there. Let's just move on down. Where do I grab ideas for activities from? I think I use my course book. I mean, not only because I wrote it, but even if I'm not teaching from one of my own course books, I use the course book a lot. But what I do is to take things off the page and do things with them. So I use texts as dictations. I go back and revisit them. I try and think how to engage my students because of their local needs and interests in the materials that are there. But I use course books a lot. I don't go out and reinvent things all the time. Thanks, Ali. That was your question. Have you ever tried other authors besides Shakespeare? Definitely, yeah. I use lots of modern British authors, lots of different things, and lots of different texts from different places. Which course books did I write? I wrote Global, Elementary, and Beginners, both in conjunction with another author. I'm from London. I'm just answering these questions, but I live in Madrid. And do I teach children? I have taught infants quite a lot, and at the moment I'm teaching teenagers. The people I taught at the beginning, I taught them for about 9 months, and some of them have definitely continued studying. I still see them in the school. Eleanor, you teach with Global. Brilliant. Caroline got booted out of the session as you handed over to me. I don't quite understand that. What do I do to encourage beginners in speaking? I think going back to what I said before, scaffolding. Making sure I support them all the time. I write things on the board, bits of information. I just think they need to be supported an awful lot. What part of the oh, there's a big question here. Stakeholders, this. Well, I think in terms of getting students involved, I think lots and lots of personalization is really, really important. I think the more that students can actually engage with the language and see that it's relevant for them, the better. I think sometimes if we just teach from the course but without adapting it to our students and thinking about them, then it can be a little bit dull and a bit distant. I think language needs to be live for them. How to teach legal English? I think that's another webinar, and I'm not the expert on that one. Do I think playing video is a good thing? For listening, yes, but you have to remember it is a listening. So you still need to set tasks, just as you would for a listening. Don't just put the video on. Do you translate anything to your students? I use translation as a tool in class, but I use it, I control when we translate and when we don't. And I try and make sure the students have all the language they need to do things in English, so they don't need to slip into their mother tongue. But sometimes I use translation as a tool, perhaps more with advanced students. Wouldn't you say some of these ideas may be unrealistic, especially if they're having problems with saying even very basic ideas? I don't think so. Obviously, our students still need lots of basic practice, and as I said, I probably found 150 ways to practice the verb to be, and we spent a lot of time on that, and a lot of time going back and doing grammar, and lots and lots and lots of basic practice. But I think we also need for students to feel that there is a reason for all this, and I think a lot of that reason comes from being able to express themselves as adults and not feel that they kind of leave their personality outside the classroom when they walk in. So I think if we can encourage them and support them to be able to express themselves. One day, for example, with my beginner students, we talked about voluntary work, but my students were all retired, as you saw, most of them were retired, but a lot of them did voluntary work. And they started talking about that, and it was fascinating because they were very interested and impassioned and committed in what they were doing, and it was a genuine conversation. So I think we have to look for motivation by letting them be themselves. How to motivate elementary students to do homework when they seem to be so busy? Be firm. I always expect my students to do homework, and I think I give out that expectation, but what I do is also to give optional homework. So there's some homework which is compulsory for everybody, and then there are some things which are extra for those students who have the time. One more minute? One more question, okay. How about the students' tendency to switch to their L1? I think they tend to do that when they don't know the language they need. Listen to your students. You may well find that when they're checking homework together, they go into their L1 because you haven't told them how to do it. So I teach them expressions like, what have you got for number 1? I think it's blah. And I write them up on the board every class, and before we check homework, we go over those expressions, and then they have no excuse. And I think, by the look of it, that's us out of time. Yep, I'm afraid
Hi, Kate.
so.
Thanks very much for that. I'm sorry, everybody. I actually got booted out of the system just as Kate handed over to me. I heard her say that she was going to hand over to me for the questions and answers, and my system decided it was going to shut down. So apologies for that. That was very ill-timed. Okay, for those of you who asked at the beginning, I said that I would pop the certificate up for you. The link is there. It's lovely that you've all really enjoyed. I can see how much you've enjoyed that, because usually I'm now inundated with questions for certificates, and instead you're all actually thanking Kate and saying how useful it was and how instructive it was. So that's brilliant. Andrea, no, I know you can't see the link. Unfortunately, everybody is putting in their thanks, which is lovely, which means that I can't actually send it through to you at the moment. Yeah, the recording is in process, Kevin, we know. We will make the recording available afterwards. We'll send you all a follow-up email which will have the link for the recording, it will have the link for the certificate, and that way you can download everything at once, but it won't be until we've had a chance to actually process the recording and upload it to the website. So it won't be immediate. Don't feel the need to email tomorrow to say where is it. It'll probably be next week sometime, early next week. Sometime early next week you'll be getting that. I'm going to stop the recording in just a moment. First of all, I should be able to, I know lots of you are asking about the certificate link. I think I should be able to send many of you. You may find now that you get your certificate link opening in another window. Lots of you should have been sent to the certificate link now. You'll see that there's a space for you to fill in. Yes, good, excellent. There's a space for you to fill in your name. There's nothing creepy about it, I promise. It's just basic technology. I can't see anything else on your computer, I promise. You can fill in your name. It's already been signed by one of our senior managers to say that you were attending. And there's another space next to that for you to sign. That's for you to countersign to confirm that you attended today. I know that causes a bit of confusion sometimes. I'll pop the link in here again for those of you who are still telling me that you couldn't get it. And like I say, it will come to you later on next week in an email.